Hello and welcome to Burning Questions. I'm Mbali, and today I have two amazing guests, Herman and Nicholas. Hi, guys.
Hey, Mbali.
Thank you all for joining me.
And Mbali, I've got a little dog here, Kaspar, because he's a brand new puppy. So I don't want to leave him because then he might start whining. So if he distracts me, just carry on without me.
Okay. Hi, and welcome to you too, Kaspar. Nice to meet you, boy. Is it a boy or girl?
It's a boy. Well, he hasn't decided his gender yet.
Oh, I have a thing for... Okay, let us move on. So, guys, on today's episode, we have a question from Anonymous, and it reads as follows. How can a country like South Africa, with extensive government power and control, fail at so many things? Mr. Lorimer.
Right. So the government of South Africa and quite a lot of governments around the world, they think that the solution to a lot of problems is centralization. That means taking all the power and putting it in one place so you have a relatively small group of people making the decisions. And on the surface, this kind of makes some sense, right? When you think about South Africa, generally local municipalities are really dysfunctional. Provinces are sometimes a little bit better, and the national government tends to be a little bit better. So like if you wanted President Ramaphosa to be in charge of you or the premier of Mpumalanga, you'd probably pick Ramaphosa, right? Because Mpumalanga is not exactly the best run place. So this idea appeals to quite a lot of people. And also it sort of on a theoretical level makes some sense, right? There's this idea that why don't we take all of the top people, the most talented people, the most experienced, clever people, and we put them all in one place together where they can make the decisions, right? And then we don't have all these red tape and bureaucracy in the way. We can just make decisions from the top and sort things out. Unfortunately, centralization doesn't really work like that. So one of the big problems is that there's a lot of distance, both physical and intellectual, from the people making the decisions and the facts on the ground. So when you tend to centralize decision-making, as a lot of South African government departments do, you have people who have very little idea of what actually the real problems are making all of the decisions for other people. And this can cause big problems because maybe they don't have good data about what the problems are. Maybe they don't understand how to interpret the data. And so they can make very bad judgment calls. We see this all the time with something like Eskom. Which puts all of the decision making in one place. And so if something goes wrong with that decision making process, the whole country suffers, right? Instead of it being localized to one area. The other problem is when you centralize decision making power, to keep it decentralized, to keep it centralized there in one place, you need to make sure that other people don't get ahead of themselves, that you don't have other centers of power developing in the country, right? Because what's the point of saying that you're going to put all the decision-making in a small group of people's hands if suddenly some people over there start doing things for themselves? And that means you need to put all of the powerful people together. But those people aren't always the smartest or the cleverest. So when you centralize decision-making, while you're trying to, put the best people together, what you generally tend to end up doing is put the most politically influential people together. And those people are often not the best at making decisions because, they're there because they're powerful or popular, not because they're clever. And the inevitable result of that is dysfunction and disaster. So I think there's an awful lot of problems in South Africa that stem from this basic idea, is that people on the ground at the lowest levels, whether it be in municipalities, in provinces, in communities, whatever, are not able to make decisions to change things in their lives. They have to go all the way to Pretoria to try and make those decisions. And as a result, we see a lot of problems.
Okay. All right, Mr. Herman and Kaspar.
Yes. I'm going to do the talking for the two of us. So I think one thing that really people should realize, and Nick points it out quite well, is that power and control does not necessarily go with success. I think we have this human idea, all of us, that if only central command did a better job, life would be better.
May I interject very briefly? I think the way this idea is usually expressed, John Robbie, who used to be a presenter on 702, used to say this all the time. Why don't we just get all of the stakeholders together in a room and they can just discuss it, and then it'll be perfect.
Yes, exactly. And we've seen this very much with Ramaphosa, trying to do all these conferences and this governance by consensus and stakeholder unity and consensus. But the problem is, it sort of is snobbish and paternalistic and slightly, insulting to the ordinary person to say that, well done on living the life you lead. But we've got a collection of people somewhere better equipped to understand your life, the challenges you face, and the solution to those challenges than you yourself. Now, I think this is sometimes, in my experience, a very middle class. If you're doing okay-ish, you've got a tendency to group the poorer people together and sort of think, well, they can't think for themselves. Imagine giving the poor masses power over their lives. They'll ruin it. And I just think that's I don't know quite where it comes from, but there's a very interesting notion in history or instance in history where the poorest people with almost no education made incredible choices for their lives that led to generation after generation being better off than the previous generations. And that's the slaves in the American South. These were people who were by law prohibited from getting an education, numeracy, literacy. These things were actively taken away from these people, or the opportunities to become, able to read and write and do mathematics was actively made illegal in many of their cases. And one of the arguments in the time of the around the Civil War, the 1860s, when this idea of abolishing slavery came about, many opponents sort of found themselves saying, oh, yes, I think slavery is bad and it should end. But if we end it overnight, these poor, mindless people, what will they do? They won't know how to look after themselves. If the government and the masters, the slave masters, can't decide for them anymore, what will they do? They don't have the skills, the intelligence to decide for themselves. Thankfully, that argument didn't win too much traction because slavery was sort of ended by constitutional mandate. And within a very short period of time, people who were slaves went to being free. But the problem is they couldn't read, they couldn't write, they couldn't do sums, and they were incredibly poor. Now you'd think these people are, discount them. They'll never amount to anything. But you see the opposite happening between the 1860s and the 1960s, especially in the generations descending from freed slaves. Every generation from the freed slaves, without the ability of getting an education, somehow managed to be better off in terms of literacy and numeracy and the amount of money in their pocket than the previous one. And that's because the poor people who were slaves, who had children, understood better than anyone else probably could that they wanted their kids to have better lives. That means bribing or convincing the local Baptist pastor or Methodist pastor to, against the law, teach their kids how to read and write. And you see that happening every generation, from the very poorest people to the 1960s, every generation for 100 years, smarter, better off, better living circumstances. So that is something I always tell, relate to people, saying that, don't think that the poorest in society are poor because they're stupid and that they are stupid and therefore they can't be trusted with their own lives. Someone in Pretoria, some central group of experts must decide how to manage these people. No. Yeah. Freedom is actually the thing that in many cases makes life better. So the question, how can a country like South Africa with a powerful government with extensive powers be so bad at many things? I think it's exactly because it is so centralized. And Nick explained why, I think, quite brilliantly.
Okay. Thank you so much, guys. Nicholas, anything you want to add to that?
No, I think Herman covered that pretty well. I mean, you can. I was giving a more abstract answer there, but you can look throughout history to find examples of people who decide they're often very well educated or very well off people deciding that they should be the people to make decisions for others. And in almost every single circumstance where that happens, things don't really go well for either party, especially for the ones who are having the decisions made for them. Because at the end of the day, if you make a bad decision for someone else's life, it's not really your problem, it's their problem. So, things can go wrong.
And I think, Mbali, a way of approaching this question, in a conversation, if you ever encounter this argument of people saying, right, we need to get the best people, give them all the power they need, and be careful. People often refer to this idea of a dictator from Roman times. I think they probably watched Batman: The Dark Knight, where if the city was under siege or something. Nick, you'd be able to give the proper info here.
There was there was actually, I think the best example of this was a American New York Times columnist, an opinion writer, and he once wrote a column where he said, if only America could be China for a day, because then we'd be able to cut through all of the squabbling and the decentralized power that gets in the way of us implementing change, and we'll be able to change the whole country overnight, and we'll just do it for a day. And that's exactly people falling into this fallacy.
And I think, actually, speaking about America, I think Cincinnati, the city in Ohio, was named after one of the very successful Roman dictators, King Conatus, who was obligated by Rome to, govern in a time of great crisis, and then who gave up his power and became a farmer in Nicaea, I think, if I remember correctly. And people often hold that as the example, saying that would work. But the problem is, it's like Steve Jobs, dropping out of college or university. 1 in a billion of these centralized, powerful figures will govern well. The rest of them will just compound the errors they make, because they make them for everyone. So when someone comes to you with an example like that, firstly, point out that's very much the exception, not the rule. And then secondly, ask them, put them on the spot, challenge them, saying, why do you think a remote government in a capital city knows better how to raise a child than a mother in a township? Because that's the claim they're making. Challenge them with that, make them uncomfortable, and I think you'll see some squirming and some weakening of the position. Tactically, that's what I would do.
Okay, guys, thank you so much for taking your time and helping me answer this question. Anonymous, I hope your question was answered. And to everyone else at home who might have a burning question, do remember to send it through to Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. Otherwise, I'll see you guys next week.